and brought Mario Correa in, and that was another year.
I mean, the original New York Times article landed in 2016.
Right.
The first draft that you sent me was 2017. Then 2018, we brought Mario in.
Yeah.
And we were in pre-production by the fall of that year.
Yeah. And I mean, I have to say that the world that you build for this movie is beautiful. The visual texture of the film really tells the story so beautiful. Can you talk about working with your DP, Ed Lachman, and your production designer?
Yeah. I mean, the amazing thing was that we did it all there, and we did it all in the real.
Did you shoot in West Virginia and Ohio?
We shot second unit in West Virginia.
Yeah.
We picked places in Ohio State, which was our grounding rebate state, to play West Virginia.
Yeah.
But we shot at the actual Taft law offices in downtown Cincinnati, and they provided a kind of climate and a sort of sense of shadow and light and corridors and those sort of striped frosted glass window partitions and floating glass ceilings and the triangular conference rooms and all these things that Hannah Beachler, who designed the film for us, who I hadn't worked with before, and Ed Lachman, who this is my eighth major project with Ed, we would have picked this location hands down, were it not even the actual Taft Law offices. But so we were in the places, we were surrounded by the people. And I think for all of us, from an aesthetic standpoint, we kind of wanted to have a kind of sense of that cool, observant camera and rhythm that would be true across the board, that would sort of link these different locations and places and people.
Right.
That Rob anchors, but that the interconnection between them all, crossing class boundaries and state boundaries and pedigree and privilege, was so essential to how this story unfolded and how the fight against DuPont ultimately was launched.
Yeah. So, Mark, as an actor, I would imagine that you spend a lot of time just soaking up the atmosphere, talking to the people, driving those roads, going to visit those places.
I actually spent a lot of time with Rob.
Yeah.
And we made a pilgrimage out to Parkersburg.
Sure.
It's about 3.5 hours there from Cincinnati, and I just regaled the guy with questions the whole way. And he's not, he's a pretty guarded person. He moved around every year of his life. He's just very modest and not incredibly forthcoming and not very emotional either. So I probably spent, when it was all said and done, weeks with him.
Yeah.
Just soaking up as much as I could and getting as much background as I possibly could, and actually stealing as much as I could from him physically as well.
Yeah. And also that emotional reticence too,
Yeah, I mean, it's, you're telling a story about a hero who's not really anything that we would imagine our heroes to be. And as an actor, you want to go for those big, juicy moments, like that monologue. You want to blast him, or the deposition with the Holiday, who's the CEO of DuPont, But that wasn't what he was doing. And so Todd and I made a decision early on that we weren't going to try and dramatize anything, or work in the parlance of what you expect a hero to be, but just be as honest as possible to Rob in the story.
And it's a difficult feat that you guys pulled off, because you're telling a story where really the villain it's DuPont, but the real villain is the money that they can spend, that they have access to, and he knows that they're going to grind down and trying to
a system.
Yeah.
It's a whole system that you're fighting against. And that's the bigger idea of the film. I'm hoping is that, This is the same thing with the opioids. It's the same thing with fracking. It's the same thing with lead in our water. It's over Monsanto, our food being poisoned. This is the same system. It's the same fight. It's the same people fighting them. You know, these frontline communities, poor people, who sound the alarm and then hope that the rest of us are going to be there to help. But it's the same issue again and again and again. It's a government that's captured by corporate interests, and our health is being sold out. And it's not just PFOA. It's 100 other things.
Yes. and the challenge, as you were saying, is, Ken, is that this is the challenge of the story is that it's all being discovered second and third hand by Rob. You know, Wilbur is a first-hand witness, but his instincts are absolutely correct. But then the real process of discovery, the sort of investigative story, is a third-hand story that's unearthing a dark and corrupt history that has been going on for 4 decades. And given the temperament of this character, who is suspicious and not prone to suspect the worst in corporate culture, he's in fact prone to precisely the opposite. He's paid to find resolution between regulation and industry, and that's how we set him up. And so, and really all the kind of whistleblower films that I love and that I think this falls into the same category are all similar in this way, where almost the bigger the story becomes, the smaller the world of the whistleblower gets, and the more fraught and the more perilous. And they are isolated. You know, at first you see him crossing all of these boundaries of class and meeting these people and making connections. And then you see everybody feeling the impact of challenging systems of power and the intimidation and the paranoia that follows. And in a way, sort of pulling apart from each other in a kind of despair and a sense of foreboding, you know, even though he keeps getting angrier, and that fuels the next stage of the legal fight. And so you watch this progression, but because it's a real true story, it has the imperfections and the circuitous 2 steps forward, 1 step back of real life. And so it doesn't have the slam dunk at the end.
Right.
He doesn't drive away in an SUV at the end of the movie.
Yeah, the slam dunks don't happen generally, right?
Not in real life.
No, they don't.
Or they're not shown, they're not featured at least in the way we tried to tell the story.
Yeah. I also once again, to return to the way that the film is visual, as the film goes along, you become more and more aware with every new office, restaurant setting, you start to become aware of surfaces, the churches. There are 2 different churches that you see in the film, and you become aware of the surfaces, wondering, whether these chemicals they're just kind of like part of everything. The smooth surfaces, the light.
Yeah, we wanted to, Ed and I really wanted to feel like you were seeing them, that they were in the textures, they were in the colors. There's a cool palette that we play out through the whole film that absolutely, of course there's still radical contrast between these places and these people, but you feel like, there's a driving force that starts with Wilbur Tennant and his farm in Parkersburg, and ultimately, Wilbur Tennant's wishes are come true. The desire for the truth to get out, because these companies are in a position to pay out and settle and shut up the information and stop the information.
And to run the clock out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they failed at that.
Yeah. I wonder how many people in this audience can actually claim to be from any part of the country that has not been affected by some kind of problem like this. I'm from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. It was GE's flagship operation. They polluted the waters, and then they refused to remove the PCBs until they were forced to. Why don't we do some questions from the audience? Yes, right there. Wait for the microphone.
How you doing? Good to see you.
Oh, okay.
Religion was a thread that was woven through the film. Was that basically used as a metaphor, the fact that our hero likely didn't believe in God?
It is. I'm
A
trying to
metaphor?
find who's
That's-
speaking.
Can you raise your hand?
Voice of God right here.
Yeah.
Voice of God. Voice of God.
You know, what's interesting, I think, about it is you know, all the world around him is material. You know, everyone around him's getting the money, they're getting a career, they're getting the bigger house. Everything around him tells him that he should be doing something else. And this character goes on a totally different journey, which is one of, I think, ultimately kind of a spiritual journey, although it's not explicitly a spiritual journey, but it's the opposite of materialism, and it's a journey that's laden with sacrifice. And he literally leaves the world to go down into the depths. And along that is despair. And ultimately, it's a path of righteousness. Anywhere along the way, he could have just cashed in and gotten out. But he kept going with the belief that justice would someday be served, and ultimately that the decency of his fellow man would actually awaken inside of his adversaries and have them do the right thing. And so that scene when he's deposing Holiday, I keep going back to this, I wanted to tear into Holiday's ass in that scene. And I said to Rob, that's what you're doing, right? He said, no, actually, I felt that if I laid it out to him, if I showed him the truth, that he would get it and he would do the right thing. And that was his ethos during the entire process. And he's a lot better guy than I am for that. And so we are in churches at times, and that's a big part of these people's lives. And I think he would want to believe in that. But he can't wrap himself in that. To him, it's a cold comfort. It's a hollow comfort to him. Even though he is really on the journey of someone.
Moral and ethical journey. Yeah. But it's also the thing that both links the community, links his wife's, social standing and culture and family life, Wilbur's social life. But that both Wilbur and Rob are curiously excluded from. And Wilbur was kicked out of 4 churches through the course of this story, which has a huge bearing on the culture of rural Parkersburg, West Virginia. He actually did end up going to the same church. One of the churches that he did go to, or his brother, Jim Tennant, was the church that Darlene and Joe Kiger went to, which is what we show in the movie.
What kinds of churches were those? The denominations?
They were Baptist churches,
Mm-hmm,
and hers was a Catholic church.
Yeah, Catholic
Sarah's
church,
family
that
was
I know,
clearly.
yeah.
But you sort of, I find something so sort of heartbreaking toward the end where Rob really sort of surrenders in a state of the most tested period of his entire story is the long wait during the medical monitoring period that lasts 7 years, and during which the recession happens and Taft starts to merge with other companies and expand, and people start to leave and go to different branches of the law firm in other states, and there's sort of this evacuation, and no one will speak to him, and nobody will make eye contact with him in this culture. And he doesn't even understand why Tom Turp is sticking it out. Like everyone becomes more and more tested and isolated and separated from each other during this period. And then when you get the news at the end, and the science panel has literally, because he has been able to enlist 70,000 class members in that medical monitoring process, he could have just walked away and with the settlement money. Instead, he reinvested the money into, persuading the class to take part in this test. They had to fill out 3-inch thick medical histories, all of those people who participated, 70,000 people. And so they ultimately could establish links between 6 illnesses and this chemical. And at the very end, you're waiting for this news, but it's ultimately the saddest good news in the world. So the victory is an incredibly heartbreaking one for the state of the world, but it's what we have to take and move forward with.
Let's do one more. Yep. Right there.
DuPont still makes Teflon. Were they required under the disposition of the matter to make Teflon differently, to dispose of waste in specific regulated ways? Do you know?
This chemical class and that chemical is completely unregulated here. They decided to change the chemical compound to slip legislation and to slip the lawsuits, and then they began to liquidate their assets and move them into another company called Chemours, and created another perfluorocarbonate chemical called C6, which was 6 carbon molecules instead of 8. But yes, that's still around. They're still making it, and it is not regulated.
Thank you.
And one more. It's a question about the community in West Virginia and how they were affected and where things stand now.
Well, so they did a poll in Parkersburg, and they basically said, the majority said, yes, this is giving us cancer, but we don't care because we have a job. And that's where we are in America today. That's a lot of different communities who are dealing with toxic industries. We're that desperate, and that's the option that people are given. You could have a job, but it might give you cancer, or you cannot have a job and starve to death, but there's nothing in between, and there's nothing much better for you than that.
I mean, it's the ultimate definition of a company town that employs, the size of Washington Works, which continues to thrive, is 35 times the size of the Pentagon right outside the border of Ohio State and in West Virginia. But this is the main employer of this community. And so everyone knows somebody who works for or has worked for DuPont, and DuPont is paying your health care as they're poisoning you.
But if you think about it, this is an interesting thing, so on this side, the regulators are letting this go by. We get this in our blood, we get sick, then we have got to pay the health care to get ourselves better, and we're in this vicious circle where it's corporate socialism on this side and absolute do it on your own capitalism on this end, and we're the ones who are paying the price. And if the state had any stake in our health care, I promise you the water and the air and the food would get cleaned up real fast. But this is the sickness of this system, and this is part of it. The EPA was captured, the local government was captured, and so this is the end result of that.
And that describes systemic problems, cultural and social and political and governmental problems in a nutshell. But it also suggests that when you start to make significant change in one area, it's going to affect other areas of the system. So we have to start taking a stand and making these positive changes in our government and voting and making things really shift. And then they really will have a systemic impact on everything else that supports it.
What's the release date?
The 22nd.
Okay.
Very soon.
Yeah, there we go. So thanks you guys for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.